me it's doing something. Okay, welcome everyone to the July 2023 Microsoft 365 Modern Management Meetup. So I guess probably the news we should start off with was that the executives have greenlit another year of events for us.
Yes. Mark got renewed as an MVP.
Which was going to be determined whether I was here or not. I might need to edit that bit out. So with the so effectively, our renewals just sort of came through. So that means that yes, I'll commit to doing this for another year, which will probably make me MVP for another year, which means I'll have to. So it's kind of like this endless cycle.
Fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, good. So we've got a few things to talk about today, but before we do, just a quick introduction from me. I'm Mark O'Shea. I can see that we've got quite a few familiar names on there already, but I think we've got a few new names and we'll reach out to you in just a moment. But otherwise, Steve.
I'm Steve Hosking. I work for Microsoft and I do a whole heap of technology stuff in the Intune space and device management and Windows and patching.
DNS.
Yes, DNS and my triggering word this month is NPS.
NPS, okay. My name is Jeroen from the Netherlands. So good morning all. In my daily work, I'm a Microsoft 365 consultant, mostly Intune related, and I will do sometimes training via my MCT. So.
Excellent.
And we have a little meetup group as well here in the Netherlands, but that's too far, I think, to join.
I still want to make it over to one of them, at least one of them one day.
We will coordinate a trip.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. I will arrange some.
It's the least we can do, considering you're coming out here eventually.
Yeah. Hopefully in September. I still have to convince my boss. So.
And that's the real boss, not the other boss.
But you know now.
Then it's the two bosses, the wife and my boss.
Oh. Well, good luck with both of those endeavors.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get to introductions in just a moment. So for anyone who's new and just wants to drop into chat and say hi and give a bit of an introduction, some details about themselves. But otherwise, the things that we'll talk about today, just quickly, we've got a couple of events coming up locally, and by locally I mean Australia, not.
Yes.
So the first one is in Melbourne, the next one is in Sydney again.
Yep.
And then for the news item, I thought rather than sort of going through too many things, just spend a few minutes going through the Entra ID announcement from earlier today, or was it yesterday in the US? So overnight. So I'm sure some of you have already seen the news that Azure AD is now Entra ID, and we'll just sort of talk a little bit about that, because it's sometimes with name changes, you can kind of sit there and scratch your head and go, why are they doing this?
Anyway, but we'll get into that that section.
This is one where I don't think that.
I agree.
Yeah, it's like, no, they need, changes that kind of needed to be made eventually.
Yep.
Then we'll jump in and cover off the main topics or main areas of discussion for tonight, which is the release of the Intune's capabilities for managing the Windows Update for Business drivers and firmware. Now, I just sort of wanted to, I guess, just sort of set the stage here a little bit before we do get into it. We'll be focusing on the Intune elements here. And the reason for that is that you've been able to do all this stuff plus more than what Intune is going to, or does allow you to do now with this stuff through the graph for, I think,
3 months.
Yeah, it was April, May, something along those lines. So it's something that's been available for a while, but it just hasn't had a UI. So for anyone who has already played around on the graph side, there's probably a few things that you go, well, hang on, Intune doesn't have this exposed as easily yet. So we'll talk about some of that stuff as we go through. And then the final piece, the general discussion, this is just where we'll go through, and we stop the recording at that point, because sometimes you might have questions or comments that you don't really want there being a permanent record of them, and we completely understand that. So that's where if there's
Also to protect our NDAs.
it makes sure that it protects us as much as it potentially protects you as well. So with that, just quickly on the introduction side. So I can see we've got quite a few people. We're up to like 21 people in chat. So just for anyone who hasn't
20.
Because of the room.
We just had somebody leave.
Oh, okay. So I guess just quickly for anyone who hasn't attended before and wants to just do a quick introduction, either feel free to unmute, or if you want to drop an intro into chat. Either of those options are perfectly acceptable to us, as well as sitting there in silence if you just don't feel like revealing too much about yourself just yet.
Hi, my name is Vijaya Bhaskar, and I have been into IT from past 13 years. I worked on Linux. I worked as a Linux admin and different kinds of Unix operating systems before, and I was into storage and networking. And I would like to move to the Microsoft products, Azure, along with the other products. Along with DevOps and all, along with the Microsoft. I do work on Windows, and I'm planning to work on Azure Kubernetes. And how this would help me is I'm very passionate about the Microsoft products. This Microsoft 365 and all, I installed recently in for one of the organization. So it would be great help me in that. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Was someone else about to speak then?
We also have James here in the room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, my name's James Kyle. I'm a technical lead for FDC Construction and Fit Out. Working in the IT industry for the last 22 years, 10 years with FDC. I basically manage everything for them, like server backend infrastructure, and Office 365, obviously.
So just a few things.
Yeah.
And does everyone at work think you're the expert in all of it? Do you ever reveal the true secrets?
No. I'm the person everybody in the IT department comes to when they.
Oh, I love being here.
Okay, well, if no one else is going to chime in, let's jump on into just the first more of a news topic more than anything else, is the rebranding of Azure AD through to Microsoft Entra ID. So with this, probably just a few things here. We'll start off with what's on this slide, and then there's just a couple of other talking points I've got here as well. Probably the main thing related to what you've got on the slide here is you might notice that there's a version of Azure AD that's missing from that list. Can anyone identify which version of Azure AD is not on that dark blue, in that dark blue column? And it's not a trick question.
Has that something to do with the Azure AD Office tenant or something like that?
Yeah, so the Office 365 Azure AD, which despite what most people thought was not the same as Azure AD Free. There were slight variations in them. Things like initially it was some of the stuff around MFA and self-registration, but a lot of those differences kind of disappeared. And I think one of the final things that was a difference between it was being able to put your own logos on, custom logos onto the sign-in pages, for example. So now effectively, like this official chart that I've got here really needs to be updated a little bit to say Azure AD Free as well as Office 365 Azure AD are basically now the same thing, Entra ID Free. So Entra ID Free actually ends up having a little bit of extra functionality over Azure AD Free. But otherwise, it's, basically, like, I think we'll still say, like, I don't know how often you said AAD P1. Once you established it was an identity conversation, you just say P1 or P2 anyway. Now, I pretty much guarantee that I will mess up and say AAD or Azure AD for at least the next 3 to 5 years. That is a firm commitment.
Just like you're still sitting there and saying BPOS.
Yeah, BPOS. Yeah. So just a few talking points then. So just more of the, like, in case like any of you are in a situation where you're thinking like, why the name change, etc. And even though there's not, this isn't really the way that you're going to hear it explained, because obviously there are going to be a lot of different factors around it. But if you think about the Azure Active Directory name, so I'm saying the full Active Directory piece here, that is already like a 34 or 35-year-old brand, because it went GA, or it was called RTM in those days in 2000, but it's
not 30, it's 20.
Oh, sorry, 20 plus, 25. So 23 plus 2 or 3 years before that. So 25-year-old.
Because before that it was NetDog.
So basically 20. So it's a brand that Microsoft's used for 25 years. So if we go back to when Azure AD was first used as part of the Office 365 conversation, it was actually after BPOS. It was after Office 365 was introduced. Like at that point, it was just I think it would be fair to say it was the Office 365 directory, or your Office 365 identity is the way that you refer to it. So during that transition period, or still transition period for some orgs, moving from on-prem to the cloud, calling it Azure Active Directory was kind of like a nice bridging branding exercise where it's like, oh, it's AD in the cloud. Now, I'm sure a few of you have probably had to explain to people that Azure AD is not AD in the cloud. Like, some of the concepts of what it can do are similar, but it's not, technically speaking, it's not AD in the cloud. Now, so during that time period, or up until now, it hasn't been a bad brand. But moving forward, like the AD branding is just going to get more and more dated. So if you've got people coming into technology now and don't know anything about Microsoft technologies, if they hear you talk about AD or Azure AD, they might just think that they're the same thing and thinking, why are you talking about 25-year-old technology? Like, surely Microsoft can do better than that. So this is just one of those, like, I just view it as a clean break. I think there'll be people who come into market like within the next, next year or so, who will hear people use the AAD terminology, but won't actually be officially exposed to it anywhere. So it's always better to sort of, make these changes earlier rather than later. The longer you sort of hang on to the older names, the harder it is to stop people using them. So overall, I think this is, it's not one of those ones where it's like, why did you change the name? This is one that I think it's pretty easy to sort of figure out that it's something that kind of makes sense looking towards the future, whereas the AD branding was always extending. So that to say legacy, but I will say legacy.
Traditional,
yes. Not legacy as in bad.
traditional.
Oh, yeah. So all up, pretty good change. Now, in terms of capabilities, this is some of the things that, like, probably the most problematic one here, I think, is Azure AD joined and hybrid Azure AD joined isn't listed there.
That's a disappointment.
I don't know about you.
Does that exist?
Calling them Microsoft Enter joined. I know that is not something that is going to come naturally to me. It is going to be AADJ for a very, very long time. So there'll be little things like this where, like, I think we've probably got a certain amount of time where screwing up and saying the old name is perfectly acceptable, but then you get to the point where the name is not appropriate. But then there are also some names that aren't changing. So if we take a look in here, that aren't changing to include Entra ID. So I had to change this title because some of these names have actually or are changing from what they were. So in this case, some of the things that did have Azure AD in them aren't necessarily becoming Entra ID. So, so your Azure AD PowerShell modules are now your Microsoft Graph PowerShell modules.
That you've changed.
Yeah. So the thing though that
the first one, and I'm going to stress this one because it's very, 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 very important, is if you're still using the old MCell library PowerShell modules in commandlets, please stop. Go and use Microsoft Graph PowerShell modules because they are vastly more secure. MCell hasn't been maintained for a number of years.
Now, there's one thing that's not, or there's probably multiple things that aren't on this slide, but one of the ones that's not on here that I was chatting to Steve before the session saying, I'll make an assumption that this is the way it's going to work, is what about not
Losing connection.
by Azure. So I think if you take a look at the things that are sort of maintaining the things that are maintaining that Azure, like an Azure element to the name, if you take a look in here. So Azure.
Sorry, boys. Sorry.
We
just lost audio for the last minute and a half.
Well, I think we've got the audio.
It's back. Okay, is it back again?
Now? Hey.
Yeah.
I love technology.
So,
And we're going to turn the camera back on. I'll be on this again.
okay, so here's a prediction. This is going to happen approximately every 15 minutes.
That's okay.
Based on, so the theories that I had about why it was happening last month are now completely out the window.
Yeah, because it was that room.
It was that room, but also somebody else was VPNing through, going through their work environment where their machine probably had some additional restrictions on it. So I was ready to blame that person, but no, or that person's organization.
Yes.
I have to
blame my organization.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So Azure
is Mark, is that a live demo Intro private access?
Sorry?
It's a live demo of Intro private access.
No.
So not sure where things were cut off, but in terms of things that will keep the Azure AD name, probably the best way to think of it is things that you really still need to use Azure for, or potentially another way to think about it, if it's something that your Azure subscription is going to charge you for. So Azure AD domain services, Azure AD B2C, these are things that Azure will charge you for as opposed to a P1 or a P2 license, for example. So hopefully that line of thinking holds as we move forward. Now, the other thing as well, which I thought was pretty funny, but I completely understand why they included it. And I put that final bullet point, I just copy and pasted that one straight in. Because you look at it and go, why would you need to put that in? And it's like, oh, because people. Somebody's going to go into old docs docs before learn content and complain that it still says Azure AD something instead of Entra.
I'm going to go to my TechNet documentation.
Yes. It still has references to .NET. So that one I thought it was kind of funny, but unfortunately I completely understand why they had to put things that are bleeping obvious in there, is because people don't want nice things. They want to complain about other things. Okay, so that one all up, this is one that I think is fairly straightforward, pretty understandable just in the general scheme of things. It's not sometimes when you see some of the name changes, you think it's just someone's bored and wanted to print new T-shirts. But in this case, no, it's things that do make sense. Now, a few events that we've got coming up. So the first one, and we might have somebody on the call who might want to
He's not going to come off mute. He want to promote his own product.
No,
I doubt Jose will want to talk about this.
no.
No, well, I'm just actually arriving at home, so I have my little one with me. I'll
Oh,
leave to
okay.
you, Steve. Thanks.
I'll run it.
Okay.
So we've got Expert Live, not Expert Live, Workplace Ninja. Expert Live's the next slide. Workplace Ninja is going to be on in Melbourne in 2 weeks' time. Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
And basically, it's going to be an afternoon at the Microsoft office. Come on down. Jose and myself are going to be presenting a session, or a couple of sessions. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to have Matt Shadbolt there.
Oh, okay.
From the 365 team. And yeah, highly recommend it.
Yeah. And we're gonna have a ticket for the Workplace Ninja Summit Switzerland for the participants. We're gonna raffle between the people in Sydney and Melbourne. So
Only the ticket, not the flights.
only the ticket, not the flights,
Or the hotel.
all the accommodation.
I have an important
already-
question.
It was already $2,700. So.
And we'll put the link for the meetup in link for the event in the meetup because Mark didn't put it on the deck.
We'll drop it into that.
Yeah.
I have an important question.
Yes.
Will lunch be provided?
We're gonna be
Oh,
providing afternoon refreshments, and then we're gonna have it during the networking. We're gonna be buying pizza and beers and stuff. No lunch. No.
Nice. That's okay.
So I'm not sure, was that a proper question or was that a joke question?
That was a
I know, but it's important because, well, see, I've got this special way of treating things like this. Anytime there's uncertainty, I'll eat in advance. So let's say that I'm flying down to this. Even though I'm pretty sure there'll be like a meal offered on the plane, I am not willing to risk that. So I would eat something before I got on the plane.
Yep.
And I would probably then stop and get something to eat for lunch before getting into freshwater plates.
Well, yeah.
And then wonder why I'm really tired by the time the sessions kick off. Okay, so we've got that one coming up in Melbourne. So yeah, 2 weeks and 1 day. And I'll assume that Steve hasn't booked his ticket yet.
Haven't booked my ticket, haven't booked my hotel yet. It's fine.
Okay. So probably just the other thing as well is that, yeah, Workplace Ninjas, that is a free to attend event.
Yep.
Whereas Experts Live, what is it, $99
Yep.
for the 2 days? So $99, what's that, 3 coffees? So, you know, or 3 coffees in North Sydney.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Pretty much.
So with this one, yeah, it's a 2-day event. Now, this one is, yeah, so this is where we are, right, or not in the room that we're in, but in the
Essentially.
location that we're in. So Microsoft offices in Sydney, yeah, so 19th to 20th of September. And hopefully, so Jerome's not, he's kind of disappeared at the moment, but some of his sessions have been accepted for this. So now he just has to get approval from home and work to actually come over and present them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Steve and I can look at them 2 minutes before
And
they're
present.
due to kick
Yeah.
off.
But I've been going through some of the background stuff on this, and there's some really cool content coming up. We have some interesting sessions around Intune and device management, as well as the Ledger Cloud conversation. And believe it or not, there's going to be topics and discussions around AI and ChatGPT.
Oh. Yeah, and if you are planning on attending either of these, yeah, just sort of reach out to us in advance if you want to sort of meet up or anything. Especially if, like, for something like this, if you're flying in from interstate the night before or whatever, and you want to sort of meet up with a few people, just give us enough notice. Don't sort of reach out when you land in Sydney the night before.
Yeah.
Let us know in advance, and we can probably sort something out.
And look, if what we'll probably look to do with the Experts Live event, if we've got enough people coming in, we may look to do a special user group for that.
Yeah. So when's that? So that's.
Is there a speaker dinner before on Monday?
Potentially.
Potentially.
But we don't talk about that publicly.
That's behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, probably I don't know if you, but I'm I am a member of the Express Live the Netherlands team. So
Yay! That's where it started.
I will
believe.
bring my sweater with me, a hoodie.
All I heard is Steve's getting a nice Experts Live sweater.
Is it like a fancy Christmas sweater?
I hope so.
No, it's dark. It's just dark blue with Express Live on it.
Okay, so finally we get
Yay.
to what the topics actually are. So for this one, before we actually get into the main parts of this, I thought I'd go through the comments and the feedback on the blog posts and the AMA that they did like 3 or 4 weeks ago to try to just sort of look for some of the common, questions that kept coming up, thinking that they're probably some of the same questions that we'll get as we go through this. So I thought, let's just cover off some of these things first, because it's probably going to help explain some of the things that can or potentially can't be done as we go through in a bit more detail. So probably the most important one to start off with is this is something that seemed to be overlooked in some of the comments, but this is built on top of Windows Update for Business. So if it's something that the Windows client can't enable and Windows Update for Business can't enable, exposing an interface through Intune isn't going to extend the back end or the client side capabilities. Instead, it's providing a management layer over those capabilities. So just as one of the examples that I've got sort of called out in here is, so it supports, and notice that in here specifically, I put in PC firmware. I should have actually put an asterisk in there because it could also be, depends on which PC you have. But
No, it actually works well for gaming computers, like custom built computers.
like with, oh, okay.
I actually have that as part of my demo.
Oh, we'll have a look at that.
Oh.
Mine's sitting there sad and empty. But that's probably because of the inside, it's the insider stuff.
Yeah.
So first of all, so PC firmware and drivers. So the PC part of that is important because some of the comments that I started seeing were, what about, docking station firmware and things like that. It's like an easy way to think about it, at least for now, is your docking station a PC?
So I'm going to challenge you on that one. If the vendor has published the hardware driver into Update for Business, into Windows Updates, it will apply.
That's what I've got up there. Reread the sentence.
I don't read that. You said it doesn't.
I said firmware. You're talking about drivers.
Firmware still gets applied.
Drivers do.
Well.
So that's where the confusion comes in. So let's assume let's say you've got a docking station. It's probably a pretty safe bet that the Ethernet adapter in there is probably Realtek. I think that's a pretty safe bet these days.
Yep.
So things like that. That Ethernet adapter, driver update coming through would be there. But even going to things like Surface devices to update Surface docks, you've got it down, and this sort of falls into what you've got to do for the others is so there's actually a separate utility you have to download to update. Dock 2 might be okay.
Yeah, I haven't two dock gigs.
Okay, because Dock 1,
it actually agent ending is a problem.
Yeah, and the only way that you knew it had been updated from that PC anyway was a registry entry that you had to go looking for. Not the best experience, but the thing here is that this is stuff that they are looking at. So they're working with the IHVs and the OEMs, et cetera, to make sure that this stuff, it's the kind of thing that they know that, you can't just assume that it's your bias / UFI that needs updates. They know that, like even the example that I've got up here is, how many of you have done firmware on your monitors at home? Yeah. I don't know what that says about this. I got an email saying, hey, there's a firmware update available. It will give you more brightness. And I need it. I'm feeling quite dull.
I
Yeah.
update every bit of driver or firmware that I can.
So, so that's the thing where it's something that has to happen, just in terms of where vulnerabilities are going to be exposed. So think about, let's say there's some kind of USB compromise exposed in the USB dock that's built into your display or something like that. So there's, basically we have to assume that this is something that's going to become, way more prevalent. Now, the other thing as well just in that first section is like fairly common types of questions seem to come up around, well, what if it's like I'll use an example of Steve's laptop. What if it's, Lenovo devices work better if it's a specific Lenovo published version of that driver? And the thing to watch out for with this is that is something that will work through this. But what you have to remember is that if you're using the CHID or the computer hardware ID targeted versus, so it's targeting the computer versus the HID is targeting the device. So if you go down the CHID path, you are on the CHID path. So let's use NVIDIA drivers as an example. If you go down let's say Steve approves the NVIDIA CHID targeted package for his Lenovo device, but they only update that every 3 or 4 months. That means that those other monthly NVIDIA updates, driver updates, aren't going to go to his device. Now, we can argue about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's just the thing to sort of watch out for here is that if you do go down that CHID path, you are committed to that CHID path. And most of the time, I think for most orgs, or at least traditionally, that would be what they prefer, because it means if they have to lodge a support request, or even the fact that it's getting updated less frequently than the hardware vendor itself, that would, or than the device, like the network adapter or video adapter company. So that's one that there's a few questions that sort of popped up around that. But once you've gone down that more specialized driver path, it's not going to try to flip you across to a generic path. Now, other things as well that you'll see in, like once we get into the demonstrations, and Steve will hopefully be able to show this in his samples, is you'll also be able to see the optional drivers that are there. Now, this was something that I was curious about. How often do you ever go into the optional updates and choose to install drivers that your device by default chose to ignore?
Monthly.
Just because you can, well, they're there. Like optional doesn't mean don't do it.
Optional means that they've not been tagged by the hardware vendor as being mandatory to be installed. Interestingly, Dell and HP firmware is published as optional, not mandatory, because by default they don't want to deal with BitLocker or drive encryption.
Okay, so
But I'm not going to say anything more.
So we'll see some of that stuff as we get into the demonstration. Now, other things here, and I think this is the telemetry taking up to 8 hours. Now, I don't want Steve to yell at me for this one, but when I saw people going, oh, that's a long time, I just shrugged my shoulder going, oh, it's Intune. It's cloud services. Like I've just been conditioned to it.
Why would I be unhappy with you? That's a statement I want people to have.
Now, the next one is one that is one where it's like, okay, I understand where these questions are coming from, which is why doesn't it support device filters? And it's because it's not your typical MDM/CSP policy. So they are building out, so if you go through their public comments, they have committed to building out filter support. Obviously, they're not giving a time frame, but it's something where they can't just or it depends on how you interpret what they're saying. They're saying that they can't just leverage the existing filters as they're built in Intune. Now, that doesn't really provide an answer as to could the way they do it still read the settings from the existing filters you've created. I hope that's what they mean, as opposed to you will need to recreate filters that you have. So in this case, it's something where you do need to rely on groups for targeting. unfortunately, without the benefit of going through and using filters. Now, other things that are, that kind of fall into that, frequently asked questions category is things around, what about if the driver needs a reboot, etc. And when you're doing your demonstration, just do you want to show the publish on this date option? So we can basically get stuff aligned.
I will have about 100 options to be able to do that.
Oh, okay. So so basically things here is that we can set when we want the driver to be available, but also it will, as you can see on the slide, the quality update deadlines and the grace period settings will also apply to that reboot. So they don't want the device, being rebooted by multiple different management processes. They want, trying to tie it all into good old Patch Tuesday.
So part of that conversation is try to approve everything on the Patch Tuesday, or because then it's going to align with your patching cycle. Yeah. Just to summarize what Mike was saying.
Then some other comments.
So totally paying attention.
Then some other comments that came through about that is like people going, oh, but but the blah 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 driver prompts for an update with its own UI, and it's like, well, that driver is broken if that driver is coming through Windows Update and it's doing that, that driver is broken. It should be the Windows process that's doing it. And then the final one, and actually know the person, it was a Melbourne-based person who, I'll see if anyone knows who he is by a few hints, who works for Services Victoria, whatever they're called, the ones that provide infrastructure services to VicGov.
That's the
who his question, I know it's a guy. I've limited the pool of people working in that division. No, so his question was basically around config manager. And here it's a matter of, are we really doing, yes, you could use it in a config manager environment, but you're enabling dual scan and you're scanning against Windows Update. So it's not something that, it's not something that's built to integrate with config manager. You've got other ways of doing this stuff through WSUS and config manager. They're not trying to give an alternate to all of that on-prem infrastructure that you've got there. Okay, so the next few slides, I'll just go through them pretty quickly because Steve will jump in and do some demonstrations of it. But what I've just got here is some, basically I've just stolen some of the product team's screenshots so we can just walk through things pretty quickly here. But really just not too many steps in terms of getting things up and running. So let's just walk through them quickly. So first off, creating the driver update profile and the deployment rings. So really here, just the two key things to take a look at in here is, first of all, which approval method do you want? So manually approving and deploying driver updates. Now in my environment, I've gone through and just turned that on, the manual, just so I can start seeing what's going on. Next month, I'll turn it, I'll stop it because I just want stuff to get recommended. But then the other option that you've got there is automatically approve all recommended driver updates. And I think there'll be several things that go into which one of these you're going to choose. If I got paid per click, I would be choosing to manually approve and deploy driver updates. It's like, oh, that's 600 new clicks this month. That's 600 clickaroos, however that translates into AUD. But also that one, but you can also think of the organization's pretty simple list of industries or orgs where manually approving everything is just in their DNA. They are going to be doing that. Whereas for people who have, and this is one where I'm kind of, I don't know, I'll get you to drop some comments into chat about this one. But at first, when I was thinking about the automatically approve all recommended driver updates, I was there thinking, oh yeah, this is like the option for people who are just letting Windows Update for Business do its thing already. However, why would you add this to that process if you're already doing it, unless it's for a targeted group of users? So I think, the way that I've changed my thinking around this a little bit is the manually approve and deploy driver updates, even in a less conservative organization, might make sense for some of the people on earlier deployment rings, for example, Whereas people who are on the let's delay general availability of everything for as long as possible, maybe they might, those groups of people, this might start, working a little bit more, for those. But you get a choice. So whichever groups you're targeting with this is, basically mixing and matching what makes sense based on the deployment ring, rings that you've got people assigned to, etc., or however you want to structure it. And then the other thing is, around make updates available after X number of days, so that it's not something that instantly rolls out. Now, is there anything else on this one that I wanted to cover off? Pretty straightforward there. On the next slide, so this is something that's going to take a while to go through and populate. So even though I said it will take 8 hours to get the data in, that's 8 hours from when the device checks in. So effectively, you'll have to wait for a while to get this data in. So don't just sit there and start the countdown and say, let me know what's there. So in this case, you can see that it's probably not. So I'll use the, again, just sort of reminding you that I said that I stole their screenshots here. So that's why it says Ryan. But also this is kind of the nonsense group types that you'd end up seeing in a lot of our test environments versus something that really represents what you'd see in a production environment. Because you're not going to be calling it those things. You're going to be putting in brands or models. Has tended, oops, we've lost sound again.
Have we got audio back?
Yep.
Oh, change this camera. The room just rebooted.
Yes.
And gone. We don't hear you.
You have reached
Huh?
Sean.
Grab Mark.
Hey.
Sorry, everyone.
Maybe this one will work better.
Probably not. This is the one that we've got the audio issues at the front of the room.
Yeah.
Right.
It looks familiar.
Yeah. Very familiar. Let's get the door first.
Okay, so for this, so for this slide, I don't want to spend too much time on this one
Other than what we've already spent.
because Steve will go through and talk about this stuff as he's once he gets into his demo. So let's just continue on. Now, things just to watch out for here in terms of when you do approve a driver. If the driver is problematic, you can pause it. Let me repeat that. If the driver is problematic, you can pause it. So you may have some further questions on that, such as, can you cancel the deployment of that driver or other such fascinating scenarios? Let me go back to the first thing I said. If the driver is problematic, you can pause it and then hope that there's a superseding driver come up. So just be aware of that. And then I think the other thing that's kind of like a follow-up piece to that is with Windows Update for Business itself, it doesn't really have a mechanism for doing driver rollback. So if you need to do driver rollback, that would be something targeting the device. Whichever method you prefer for that. Depending on what
The easiest fix is.
Okay, and then just, I think it's just, this slide and one more. So we'll also have a quick look at the reporting. I don't think there'll be too much overall in your reporting because it's a small environment, but there is the built-in reporting. You can see, what devices are there. And then when it comes to troubleshooting, then this is where you can start seeing, what the issues are. So in this case, you can see we've got a wonderful deployment error code of -2145116149. And I think you remember that one, Steve, don't you?
It's very
one of your favorites.
Yep.
For that one. So there is some detail of what you can get in there. And then other things as well, just to sort of take a look at in here is that if you do want to get that detailed update status, you need to make sure that you have enabled that Windows data to be fed through. So basically under your tenant admin, connectors and tokens, Windows data, making sure that that's turned on so the telemetry data comes through. Now, one of the things that I need to confirm, it's mentioned in the documentation as, I think, as unsupported, and I've got a feeling that may actually mean that it doesn't work, is if you're running Windows insider builds. Now, any of you who have run insider builds and tried to get some of the telemetry out of them into some of the different log analytics solutions, for example, like the Windows update analytics, etc. There are certain things, probably the main one I can think of was things like delivery optimization. That data would not make it into the Windows update analytics, even though you could still see it down on the client. I think it's one of those cases where the insider team basically pushes the telemetry data through to other locations, not some of the default collection locations. So my suspicion is that that's what you're also going to see in this case. Now, I'll do a bit of digging to see if it is actually the case or just a timing issue, but because I've seen log-related, that log-related scenario be problematic with insider builds in the past or like ongoing, my suspicion is it's pretty much just like another way that shows up when we look at it here. So that's pretty much everything from the slides side of things. So Steve, are you ready to?
Oh, you want me to demo?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, I do actually.
let me demo for you. No, that window. And make sure I do the right window, not the wrong window, because I have stuff here that you're not supposed to see. So from a demo point of view, we're all using the new devices preview tab at Blade, right? Yes, because that's the right place to be. We're then going to go to the Windows 10 later updates section. And in here, you have the driver updates option along the top. I've been very inventive with my name of my group. I've called it driver updates because we want to be descriptive with our demo. You'll see that I've assigned it to my devices, which is not where I want to go. My group called Workstation that has 3 computers in there. Has a few more, but they're all VMs. There's 3 physical computers in there. Underneath that, I've set that as a manual approval method because I want to be able to go through and see everything that's going on. And then you'll note here that there's 16 drivers to review, which is cool. That's what we want to see. But when we click into our driver updates, what we're going to see is they're under recommended. There's 16 that require a review here. But then if we go across to our other drivers, these are the optional. And there's a lot more drivers here. There's 150 drivers in here. But I've already approved a whole heap of them because I was doing some testing and then I added additional computers in there. So you'll see that I've got some AMD stuff in here. So this is the computer. Anything that's approved is my homemade computer, my gaming computer. That has a whole heap of different options here. As you can see, there's been various different versions of the network adapter driver installed and available. I've approved everything because I just want the driver installed. I don't care which version, just go and install it. You figure it out for me. And then you'll see it here. I for example, this is the Intel network driver that applies to 3 devices. But you'll note the new version only applies to 2 devices. It's interesting. And then the new version, no, that's the old version, applies to 3 devices. So this is where you're going to see a little bit of that rhyme or reason appear here, and that depends on what's been approved for your hardware ID by your vendor. From here, we can go in, as Mark was talking about, we have the ability to go and just pause this once it's been made available.
So Steve, it says actions, but the dropdown only has 1 action. Is that a UI bug or is that a promise of things to come?
Feel free to go and raise a UI bug on that, Mark. I'll leave that one for you. So under the recommended drivers, what you'll see here as well is I made a point of putting in one of my Surface Go's because I'm like, you know what, I want to see, do I have the ability to approve Surface firmware? And I do, which is pretty cool. And you have the ability, you do have actions here, Mark, you can decline it and you can approve it.
Oh.
So we go.
Well, there we go.
Yep. And then we specify that date. So that's pretty cool. Great, done. And that would approve and be sent out to those devices without any problem. Same with the other devices, pretty straightforward, pretty easy. It's the same experience. You go and approve, decline as you go through. What you're not seeing here is whether it's superseded. There's, oh, interesting. Oh no, that's because that's the actual name. But you'll see here it's got like the Wacom driver, and that's going to be for my Surface Go, I would assume. But we don't know. We are working on getting better visibility of that sort of information, but it doesn't exist today. Yeah, so that's drivers. Probably word of caution is these policies can take time to apply to the device because they're using, as Mark alluded to, they're using the Windows Update engine and they're using the global ID that's associated with that, not the Intune ID. And what that means is it can take some time to process and make sure that the correct policy is applying to the device. So what you may find is during UBI, some ultra critical updates for your device, display drivers, things like that may automatically get installed still until this policy applies to that. Is there questions? Or is it just really logical and makes sense and we're all happy days and we're just going to turn it on tomorrow?
Have you got anything in the reporting side?
Potentially. Let's see. Let's go on an adventure together.
Will Microsoft be looking at including this in auto patch, or will it remain?
Oh, yeah, that's another conversation. Yes.
Let me have a look. Oh, will they? Yeah, that's a very good question. Will it be included in auto patch? So for those that aren't fully seeing what I've done here is I've gone down under the Windows Auto Patch menu here and I've gone to release management for Windows Auto Patch. Under release settings, we have now a checkbox here for.
I love that the mouse that's being displayed is nowhere near where you're clicking.
Yep. Of course. That's why I'm highlighting, Mark, so you can see it. So you now see that we now have the Windows driver updates preview, and I'm definitely going to accept that, and I'm going to turn that on. And what this will do is we'll go through, and it may take up to 24 hours to apply into your tenant, and then you can set it so it automatically approves it, or you can turn it to self-managed. So basically it switches it from what you have today to changing it to self-managed, so you can go and leverage the existing or the new driver management tool. So what you have today by default with Windows Update for Business, and let's go for a little bit of a deep dive, is if we look under the hood in our feature updates, our update rings, and we click on any of these, it doesn't really matter. If you look in here, you have Windows Driver. So who knows what happens when you turn Windows drivers under the update ring to allow? What actually happens? What's being approved? Anybody? Do you know, Mark? So when you turn that on, any recommended driver will automatically be installed on your device, but not any optional driver. The optional driver will be made available to your end users to install, but they're not going to be forced to install it. So this is why what we've added right now with Auto Patch is the ability for you to go and change that to self-managed. So then you can go and use the new driver management features to do the optional and automatic drivers as you see fit. Will this change in the future? More than likely. But we want to see how people are using it first.
Yeah.
Because if we just set it automatically for both, predictably there's going to be more problems created than fixed. So, make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah, cool. Any other questions?
What is the big difference then to get your drivers and your firmware updates via Intune instead of the HP Connect portal, for example, or the Surface Management portal?
I've not personally used the HP Connect portal, but what has been explained to me by a couple of people, and the same with the Lenovo solution that they have, is they're publishing Win32 applications. They're not publishing it via the Update for a Business engine. So that's the big difference. The Surface one, all you're doing is basically just approving drivers in Windows Update for Business for your organization.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I have used the HP Connect portal a year ago, 2 years ago, I don't know, and their solution is to make use of the remediation scripts.
Yep.
So they're polling every day or something like that, checking if the BIOS is still up to date or whatever.
So probably the difference there, and granted, I work for Microsoft, so I don't know the full architecture of the HP solution. But if they're going and running proactive remediations on the client side, think of how does that scale in your environment? Yeah. If they're going and grabbing a 5K library from every device to see if it's the latest version. I'm not saying that in a negative. I'm just saying from a look at what it's doing. We're doing this already with Windows Update for Business, so it might work better for you to use the HP solution. It might work better for you to use the Update for Business solution. It comes down to when the vendor is publishing the drivers into updates.
Yeah,
they can publish into their update engine faster than they can publish into Microsoft updates.
Yeah, and with the HP Connect portal, you can the bell. You can configure the BIOS via passwords or settings or whatever. I have to open the door. 1 second.
Yep. And yeah, that will probably be the other advantage as well, right? Is the Windows Update for Business solution is we're going to cover as many devices as we can. If you need bespoke or if there is a customization required for this update, we don't have that functionality in Update for Business. You'd hope it was obvious. It is all I can say on that one. So that's why you may want to use the HP Connect solution or the Lenovo solution, is because they add that extra level of functionality. And this just comes down to how simple do you want to make your system or how complex. At the end of the day, all that we want to see is people updating and keeping drivers, firmware, and OSs up to date, whether it's via our tooling, whether it's via third party. Sure. As long as it's up to date, happy days.
Oh, happy days.
Cool. Any other questions around this stuff? Actually, we didn't get to the reports.
Can I just ask a quick question? Sorry, what was said earlier about BitLocker?
BitLocker's fun, is what I would say. So the reason why why there has been hesitance from multiple vendors for putting firmware as recommended or required in Windows updates is because in certain scenarios, drive encryptions don't get handled correctly and safely when applying that firmware to the device. So there's certain circumstances, if you don't suspend BitLocker when you do firmware, you'll get prompted for BitLocker the next time you sign it. So this is why don't just enable firmware for your whole organization automatically. Go through and take the time and put it through a ring-based scenario, because you want to make sure that you don't then have every single one of your employees giving you a call on Monday morning going, Can I get my BitLocker key? So that's the only gotcha around that one. And that's pretty common. We handle it quite well with Surface. Windows Updates does have mechanisms to handle that process. And it comes down to how the driver or the firmware is being deployed and made available. If you do run into those issues, raise a support ticket with your vendor and Microsoft, and we will work to get it fixed is the ideal and utopic goal is we go and fix that so you don't run into that issue. But definitely raise a support ticket on that one because it's something we want to get fixed. I don't have diagnostic data turned on. There you go. So make sure you turn that on. No, I don't have Windows license verification turned on. Yes, I definitely own one of those licenses.
At least one.
So this will take a little bit of time to generate by the looks. Let's just randomly grab a driver. See if it actually will report anything. Considering those computers are currently turned off, so probably not. But did that answer your question, Damien?
Kinda.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm driving, but that's enough answers. That's fine.
Yeah. I wish I could give you a definitive on the BitLocker and drive encryption one, but it's one of these ones that it's the same story that it's been for 10 years. It comes down to you just need to test and validate. In saying that, most organizations and most environments that I've done this sort of stuff with recently hasn't even been a conversation. It's just updated without any issues. But look, we have reports, Mark. We do. I don't like that I can't just generate for all.
Updates.
It was 170.
Windows driver.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just running the reports function, but
Nice.
there is no driver in it, so probably that particular machine has already all the latest drivers, so I don't see any drivers at the moment.
Fair enough. It does take a bit of time. So Brendan was asking, after a new build, how long does it take to see drivers to appear in there? So one of these devices, which is the Desktop 6.5, I built that device, about lunchtime? We started talking about it. And it was reporting within 2 hours, I think. So, and I'm going to use the asterisks and the your mileage may vary. 8 hours is what we document publicly.
Is it a physical machine or a virtual machine?
Physical. So all this has to be physical because I need to be able to get drivers to appear.
Yeah.
So that's a HP 360 something Gen something.
I guess in years gone by with older versions of Windows, if you're running them as VMs, the Hyper-V client would need to get updated occasionally. But even then, I don't think that would have shown up as a driver.
Nope.
Yeah.
That's correct.
But you can't get an overview of the already installed drivers on the machine, or?
No, you can't. It only shows you what's required. It doesn't show you what is needed. What is already there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So yeah, this device was nothing wrong then. I don't know.
Yeah.
This device is broken. Oh, yeah, last contacted 1:14. So a few hours ago, but yeah. Sure.
Check.
Any other questions?
Okay, I might stop the recording now so that we can switch over just to general conversation. So just let me stop that.